Welcome to Gender A Wider Lens, exclusive content for our listener community.
In these bonus episodes, we're going to dive even deeper into the issues surrounding gender in today's culture. Some weeks we'll respond to listener Q&As.
And we'll also be introducing a series called Dinner Party Conversations. And here we start grappling with the difficult question, such as how do we talk to people in real life about gender? And we also dive a bit deeper into topics that we touched on in the full episode.
Here is the bonus conversation. All right, so here we are. We're here with Wilfred after our episode, and we want to ask you, how do you talk about these issues, whether it's the detransition stuff that you've been looking into or some of the other kind of taboo topics that you research? How do you talk about these things in real life, if at all? Like, you know, you're at a dinner or a barbecue or a restaurant with friends and people are talking about things, and maybe you hear something from one of your books. You hear a line from Taboo, like one of the myths. Do you say anything? Do you just keep quiet? What happens at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot. A lot of this breaks down to what the group is. Okay. So I think there are 2 points here. First of all, most people think what I assume most people that are listening to something from related to Gen Spect would think, which is that you don't want to be cruel and abusive to people, but that you obviously can't change your sex, race, or other core identities. So if I'm in a sort of working class environment, visiting buddies back home in Chicago or Aurora, playing basketball, even playing golf at a Muni course, going to the barbershop, I mean, I would just talk absolutely normally with very little restraint, unless someone indicated that they were very passionate about these issues. I mean, an example of this would be one important point here, kind of just streamlining this a little bit. One important point here is that almost everyone agrees that the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
When it comes to a lot of these sort of like left and right, going at it hardcore and the niche internet sort of issues. I actually posted a question about a line from one of Gad Saad's books on Twitter. And the question was, do you agree that some women have 9-inch penises? Saad had taken this from an actual paper in the field of gender studies and just thought it was so ridiculous. He made fun of it within the first page or two of his book on what he calls brain parasites. So I asked this question, and to some extent, if you accept gender ideology at all, you would have to say yes. And I expected that about 30% of the people on the Twitter and the SurveyMonkey link would say yes. You know, my page has sort of a male bro audience, but it also has the fiance or wife of all those people and a lot of the feminist friends who spar with me online and so on. So I thought that liberal feminist friends. So I thought that you might get, a third saying, sure. In reality, the percentage of people that said, yes, some women can have 9-inch penises was 2%. Like, this was totally anonymous, and everyone just said, no, that's obviously not possible. Most men don't. That's complete nonsense. So I think that's very often the case. But Stella, did you ever?
I think that's really important. And like one of the projects we want to get involved with in Gen Spect is polling. The more we can poll the public with really quite good questions, the more we'll get just the ordinary public's kind of views, which are generally fairly reasonable. But I heard you say that about the 9-inch penis before, and then you said something more remarkable about penises, which I wouldn't mind just jumping into, if you don't mind, Sasha. Right. It's very interesting.
All right.
About, wait, sit tight.
I don't know how often penises are one of my topics, but all right.
We talk about it more often than most, probably. But you said something about when men were asked to measure their penises, it was...
Oh, yeah.
And then when it was... you tell us, because it was shocking.
So one of my all-time favorite social science statistics is that so when men were asked to estimate the size of their penises, which is how you measured penises for decades, the average estimate was like 7 inches. Okay. And this is one of the reasons that they claim that the average penis is 6 to 7 inches long is just a cliche, something you may have heard in health class. When mostly female urologists actually did a study of this, the average penis was 5.2 inches long.
Yeah, I believe
And it was
that.
there's actually a way to measure. You go down to the base and all that. I'm not going to give stats in this area, but just like the average guy dropped by 2 inches. And this says a lot about social science stats in general.
Wow.
So, I commented recently on the body count conversation, does it matter how many partners your lover has had before? And my comment was that people can just lie.
Yeah.
Like, there's no evidence. Like, when we look at the actual estimates of the number of sexual partners, first of all, it's only like 6 for women and 8 for men. Calm down. But if someone had a total of like 37 and you're an extremely Christian person, I mean, they could literally just say 5 and, then say the rosary and go on with their life. So asking people to estimate kind of any bit of sensitive data, and this applies from the domestic violence statistics to charitable giving, is really fraught. Like, it's actually very hard to do. But the penis one is at least funny.
Yeah. But self-report is such a big deal around gender. You know what I mean? It's the kind of the premise of people receiving extremely heavy medical interventions. It's based on a self-report. So it's something we've really got to kind of highlight in general. I know we're moving away from how to speak about gender, but it's such an important point. Self-report is a really, really dubious way to have anything medical happening.
Yeah, but that's the thing about mental health. I mean, it's all self-report. Any diagnosis is self-report, except for like severe
anxiety,
psychosis and things that are observable. When you ask a person about their mood on a day-to-day basis or how they interacted with their spouse, like, it's all self-report.
Even conditions like Alzheimer's, it's so much about like how do you answer these questions, or the suicide kind of, it's asking people. And one person's mental health pain is another person's troubling day. It so depends on the person. It's such a flawed instrument and a flawed kind of aspect of our industry that I think it's going to emerge now because it's become such a mess. Everybody's self-diagnosing.
What do you think, Wilfred?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that this is actually a big problem for sort of social science in general. I mean, psychology, political science. Like, I think self-reporting is basically trash most of the time. I mean, and that doesn't mean that self-reporting of your political attitudes or something like that is going to be dishonest. But if you're talking about these complex medical conditions, like one of the tests for depression is asking people, do you feel depressed and low? And I mean, that's how you get these very high depression figures. Yeah. I mean, I lost a basketball game earlier today and legitimately, as a competitive person, felt depressed and low. If I were to say this 3 times in a row, should I be prescribed Paxil or something like that, or a mild form of speed like Provigil? No. I mean, but this is a real problem. And when you talk about a third of Americans are on these psych meds, it's probably 80% of, again, young, high-performing white women. That's how you get that level of prescription. So, I mean, taking it into the gender space, if the argument is that gender dysphoria is a real mental condition that you can, quote unquote, see inside people's heads, one basic kind of local leadership level requirement that I would suggest is that people go in for a $200 brain scan, an MRI or whatever that is, to see if they have this condition before any treatment can begin. And trans activists have absolutely opposed this every time anyone's proposed it, because what it would reveal is that almost none of them have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria, I would be willing to bet thousands of dollars on that. Like, any TRAs that are watching this as opposition research, I would encourage you to go in, get one of these and see what's going on. I'm more than open to discuss that with you publicly. But I mean, I think that a large number of people who identify as transgender are young, confused kids. A large number are simply gender non-conforming women and men, which, if anything, is in many ways a good thing. There's no reason to pathologize that. Yeah. It certainly didn't make my music collection worse. A large number of them are people that have some quirk like autogynephilia that they'd prefer to minimize. And then there are people that have real brain trackable GD. There's a real question about, like, in that last case, what do you actually do? Like, for many, many years, most people, including most feminists, most guys, didn't object to the several hundred people that had gone through genital reassignment surgery and so on, basically being treated as women. The question is, what happens if there are 5 million people in the United States that say they are the opposite sex based on basically nothing? There's no medical diagnosis. There's no surgery. You still have a penis. You could be as dangerous as any other adult fighting man. That seems to me to be really the question. So, yeah, the self-diagnosis of any serious condition is silly, and that is especially the case here. And last sentence, but that's especially the case because you can track most of these. Like, real depression for males coincides with lower testosterone levels. Like, there are a bunch of things you can actually test someone for. Like, are you depressed, or do you need to make up with your wife and go for a run? Like, what is the level of the mental condition that you're dealing with here?
I first of all, I think it's very interesting that you warn us when it's your last sentence. I kind of like, I'm like, okay, I have to prime myself now to contribute meaningfully.
It makes us listen.
Yeah.
You focus in.
It's very clever.
It's something I started doing as a sales director years ago, just because I talk a lot, and I would just say like, I'm gonna shut up now, so you guys get ready to tell me how much money you're gonna make. And I've never had a problem with it, so I kept it as a.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna rob it.
Well, one of the things that you said is the kind of the brain scan gender dysphoria. My understanding of the research is that there's really no distinction between the brain patterns in people with gender dysphoria and those who are gay. Because that perhaps there's that kind of masculinization of the brain or feminization of the brain. And so even in that sense, you could scan someone and maybe you could determine that on the bell curve, they do have a, quote, feminized brain for their biological sex, but that still doesn't necessarily tell us that medical intervention is the right way to go. There are lots of different ways to kind of deal with that, but I get what you're saying kind of as a point. And I think similarly, I often think about people who use the sex as a spectrum argument, and then they kind of say, well, what about DSDs and intersex conditions? And I think to myself, well, you could easily get all of these kids with gender dysphoria tested. Most of them are just, probably something like 99.999% of them are just like regular kids with no genetic or hormonal anomalies. So this is such a moot point, and it's such an annoying tactic that's used in terms of the argumentation around this stuff.
Yeah, so first of all, like, if I was king, there'd be a lot of changes around here.
Okay.
I'm not sure I would allow medical intervention for most psychological conditions.
Right.
When we were talking about depression, which is kind of the classic, if you read the French and Chinese research on this, where they have, in many ways, better food, people are a bit fitter, some healthier attitudes toward interpersonal relationships, some less healthy ones. But from everything I've ever read, the things that best cure depression, I've focused on males, but are working out, running, being outside, dating or sleeping with your partner. Exactly, hang out with your boys. Yeah. The British idea of go get a pint at the pub actually seems to work really well. Men report lessened depression after that. So I'm not sure I would ever give, certainly in adult capable of violence guys, pure amphetamine to cure their depression is cured because you're on speed. Yeah. Like, if you ever look at the side of an Adderall bottle, which is something used certainly for ADD, sometimes for OCD, there's now more recommendation of it for depression. So I'm not really even exaggerating this. But the two ingredients are amphetamine and salts. So obviously people like taking speed. People like doing coke in the bathroom also. But do you really need to pretend that this is some kind of medical cure that you're using to pull people out of the slumps? Why don't you encourage talk therapy or something? So I would agree that if you are someone who in another era would have been what's just known as a butch lesbian, and you're being told that you're really a man, and even if you cross the dysphoria line, the treatment is to cut off a chunk of your leg, make it into a fake penis by wrecking your clitoris, and then sewing that to your stomach, I'm not sure I would recommend that. And I'm not being glib about this at all. That's the surgery.
I know.
So I would very rarely allow medical interventions. But a good compromise would seem to be if you test at a level where you do have gender dysphoria, which is really just the diagnosable condition. I'm sure many people with gender dysphoria are technically gay.
Yeah, I just hold you on that, because when you look at the actual criteria to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and if you go and look it up, you're going to be appalled. You're going to say this is relying on stereotypical behavior. Like, for a child to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, do they play with the opposite sex games? Do they play the opposite sex toys? Do they wear the opposite sex clothes? It's so 1950s regressive stereotype that clinical diagnosis sounds much more, infallible than it is. It's not great.
Well, just to clarify, I would agree with that totally. I was just talking about, like, if you actually put people in the, little bike helmet and you scan their brains, and the claim of activists is true, that there's a certain pattern of brain development that indicates that you're going to be 100% Kinsey scale homosexual, or you're going to have gender dysphoria. People in that position, you could argue, should be allowed to go through the process of transition. This only would apply to adults. Again, I would allow very little medical response to most mental conditions. But the question would be, a lot of these questions come up almost as debaters' moves, also being blunt. It's sort of like, extreme pro-life activists have now learned to say, and, kudos for them in terms of developing their skills. Okay, we would all allow exceptions for rape and incest in the case of abortion. Now, can we ban the rest of abortions? And like it or not, it's a pretty effective technique. It's the same thing here. Like, okay, if you think gender dysphoria is a diagnosable medical condition, why don't we limit any possible treatment only to people that go through this $300 test and have the diagnosable medical condition? Now, I think a lot of activists on the other side would say, well, no, I don't want anyone to get these surgeries, like young or old, adult or child, whatever they score as. I would bluntly incline that way myself. But that's a bit different from, are people that identify as trans now saying anything real at all? And that's a pretty valid question. I mean, like, right now, under the self-ID laws in like Louisville or in my home state of Illinois, like, I could just say I'm a woman and go to the spa. So that I think is what more people are objecting to.
I mean, I think about it more as like a filtration process, right? So I think I'm with you that it would be helpful to start with, like, let's figure out if this is even real gender dysphoria. But I think the jump from that, let's say gender dysphoria was a real thing and we could identify it, which I'm not sure it is, but let's say we could. The leap from there to medical interventions misses so much that actually is required in the interim, which is like an exploration of what this means, what options you have, what the outcomes of these interventions are. I mean, there's so much that happens between that point and that point that is kind of ignored by lots of people within this debate. A lot of people are either saying these interventions are destructive for everyone and anyone no matter what, or these interventions should be freely available to anyone who claims to be trans. And I think there's a lot of gray area in the middle that I mean, we're trying to lift up, through these conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My comment, just to briefly clarify, would be that the only situation in which I would support people's ability to go through gender transition surgeries would be for full-on adults who can demonstrate that they have some trackable medical condition. Now, beyond that point, I think there are a lot of people, including a lot of conservatives and a lot of feminists, who would say, like, no, you can't, there's nothing you can do that can make yourself female as a man, which I'd agree with, by the way. These are biological categories. And so there's just no reason to do that. There's no reason to create these complications about who uses which facilities that and so on. I mean, that is, to me, almost a separate debate. I don't see how you can stop grown-ups from either in this country or in other countries hurting themselves. Like, there are a whole bunch of procedures, like the Brazilian butt lift, where you think that men or other women aren't looking at your ass enough, so you pull it up brutally and shoot silicone into it and like cut the muscles in your back and like retie them.
It's favorite conversation.
It's consumer-led cosmetic surgery, and it's quite extreme. And the more we're aware of the fact that we've moved into a consumer-led healthcare, and we're pretending it's a medical do no harm patient doctor scenario when it isn't. That's the flaw.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that I've never met a man or a lesbian that is especially attracted to people with 50-inch asses a la Nicki Minaj. So what you're doing with this, maybe a few, but like it's a very minority taste. What you're actually doing with this kind of surgery is appeasing someone's personal feeling that they're inadequate somehow by providing an unneeded cosmetic procedure. And medicine does that all the time. So I don't have a problem if I'm sitting on a throne banning most of that. But under those circumstances, and there are a bunch of cases that establish the right to do this. I mean, there's now a surgery, bringing back the topic of penises, but I mean, there's now a penile surgery for men where you can take fat from your body or from other animals and basically, inject it into your dick. So your penis will grow. It'll grow by about an inch and it'll get thicker, but it'll become useless.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, don't inject sheep fat into your penis, man.
Have you seen the leg lengthening? Leg lengthening surgeries. Yeah. Crazy.
Oh my God.
Keep going.
The leg lengthening surgeries, I think, are a really extreme example of this trend. So something that's interesting, and I'm not a special rights activist for either men or women. I think everyone should have rights, but I don't spend a lot of time, and I spend much less time in these gender debates even than in the racial ones. But I do think that if I were paying attention to men's issues, a legitimate issue is now that women are fully saturated with being told they're ugly and fat and whorish and so on. They're moving over to the guys. So you've got all this stuff like Squash, the soap for men that smells like the outdoors in the back of a saddle, which is not something I really want to smell like. But I mean, just like all this like razors that don't shave you and cost $89. They give you that little fuzz there.
Jesus.
You know, there are now all these penis lengthening pills for men. I think, by the way, this is one of the few real negative effects of porn. Like, if you're an ordinary citizen, you see all of these things in society that don't involve like your neighbors, but that involve like the highest performing people in the culture. I'm not sure that's exactly how I'd break down porn, but like the NBA is where you watch basketball. Like many men think that the average penis is one you see in a pornographic movie.
Yeah.
You know, and you go on, you have Men's Health for men and Cosmo for women. Everyone's beautiful. These odd looking people that don't exist in reality because you can't airbrush yourself.
Yeah.
Totally.
But anyway, like leg lengthening is an example of that for the guys. That's almost as extreme as the BBL. Whereas I understand you cut a chunk of the bone out of your leg and you whittle it down so you can use it twice and you reinsert it in your leg and you gain about 6 inches in height.
Yikes.
Now,
And you lose your
as
soul.
someone who used to actually enjoy the martial arts and still runs and so on, it seems like this would be totally useless for actual masculinity. Like if someone kicked you in your leg, it would break. But nonetheless, you look real tall.
Yeah.
So you can then appeal to shallow women that are, you know, lifting their asses 8 inches and brutalizing their faces and all this other stuff. Don't do any of this would be my advice to both human sexes.
Well, thank you, Wilfred. That has been a real rollicking roller coaster there that I didn't expect. But it was
Yeah,
really,
we really
good.
appreciate your time. This is super interesting.
Glad to come on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being part of our listener community. Your financial support helps to make all of this possible.
For more ways to support the show, please follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and comment on our episodes, and of course, spread the word about joining the paid community and all the exclusive content you can find there.
And for more information, please visit widerlenspod.com.